Distinguished guests, youth leaders, and ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome you to our session titled No Generation Left Behind, Socioeconomic Equity for All, organized by QatarDebate. My name is Amira Al-Ashaq, and I will be your MC and moderator this afternoon. We gather today at a defining moment for our shared future, one where the promise of progress must be matched by the pursuit of fairness. Across generations, communities, and continents, questions of access, opportunity, and dignity shape the world that we are building together. How do we ensure that prosperity is not the privilege of a few, but the inheritance of all? We now turn to an organization transforming how young people engage with the tough topics of our times. Under the leadership of our next speaker, QatarDebate has reached over 250,000 participants from more than 100 countries, equipping youth worldwide with the skills and platforms to participate in global discourse. Please welcome Abdurrahman Al-Subeh, Programs Director at QatarDebate.
Assalamu alaikum.
May the peace, blessings of God be upon you.
Distinguished guests. We have learned something over the years, that real wealth isn't measured in what you accumulate. It is measured in what you pass on. And right now, we are passing on a world where the gap between those who have and those who don't is just wide. And it is becoming a chasm that swallows entire generations. No generations left behind. That is not just our topic today. It is our test. The test of whether we have the courage to look at the system we have built. Systems determine who gets opportunity and who gets left behind and admit they are broken. Because when a child's future is predetermined by the region they are born into, by the color of their skin, by whether their parents have wealth or connections, that is not equal opportunity. That is not fair. That is a rigged game. And when economic shocks hit, a pandemic, a financial crisis, climate disasters, it is always the same communications that lose, or the same communities that lose everything, while others feel the trauma. And social mobility, the idea that your children can do better than you did, that hard work and talent can lift you up, that is supposed to be the promise. But for too many families and for too many communities, in too many places, that promise is a lie. The ladder is gone, and we wonder why people are angry, why they have lost faith. But here is what we know. It doesn't have to be this way, because socioeconomic equity isn't some impossible dream. It is a choice to invest in education for every child, not just some of them. A choice to create economic systems that don't punish the poor for being poor. A choice to listen to marginalized communities instead of deciding for them. And a choice to build resilience before the next shock hits, not after. And today, you're going to hear from experts who have spent their lives studying these inequities, who understand the data, the policies, and the solutions. And you're going to hear from young people who aren't just numbers. They are living proof of what happens when we get it right, and what we lose when we get it wrong. And the World Social Summit exists because these problems don't respect borders. Poverty in one nation affects us all. Environmental destruction in one region creates refugees in another. While we rise together and we fall together. So let's begin this conversation, not just with words, but with commitment to turn those words into action. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those opening remarks. Our debate this afternoon is titled, Globalization Has Advanced Rather Than Regressed Socioeconomic Equity. We have two sides, one agreeing with and one opposing this statement. Speakers will have 4 minutes each to make their case. Do note that they were assigned their side, so their speeches may or may not reflect their personal views and opinions. There's also something called points of information, or POIs. By the first minute, I'll ring the bell. That means POIs are opened. POIs are basically just debaters from the opposing side can barge in when the other speaker is speaking with questions or comments. So there will be a Q&A after the debate. So if you have questions or points of discussion to raise, as I am sure you will, please keep them in mind to bring up later. Now, allow me to invite the first speaker from the affirmative side, Farah Atatri, to get this debate started.
Good evening, everyone. Before I begin, let me start with a simple definition of globalization. Globalization means the growing connection between countries through trade, technology, communications, and shared ideas. It is what links the world together. But in today's world, globalization has become a requirement rather than a choice. No country, no matter how rich or developed, can live in isolation. Economies are deeply interconnected. Trade routes, supply chains, and markets all depend on the stability of multiple nations. For example, wealthy countries rely on moving their goods across borders, often through developing states. So if those border countries have unstable economies, they cannot build the infrastructure needed to safely and efficiently transport these goods. So this weak infrastructure threatens the international trade and the ability of rich countries themselves to build and create and maintain strong markets. So supporting development in these poorer nations is not an act of generosity, but rather it is a matter of international economic survival. And the same logic applies to public health. For example, diseases don't stop at borders. COVID-19 pandemic proved that an outbreak in one country can quickly endanger the entire world. So investing in healthcare systems everywhere protects everyone. Likewise, when a country faces poverty or insecurity, the effects spread through crime, migration, and even unstable economic. They all impacting both neighbors and also distant nations alike. So today's globalization reveals one simple truth. The world is interconnected, and the progress or failure in one place shapes the fate of all. International organizations and NGOs are key in turning this framework into action. For example, programs by the UNDP or FAO provide training, technology, and knowledge to local communities. They spread the productivity, they create new jobs, open also new markets, and even they equip local populations with the skills they need to manage projects and to benefit fully from globalization. So today the question is not only has globalization worked, instead we ask how has globalization helped marginalized communities overcome barriers and achieve broad sustainable economic and social equity. So let's consider the challenges that local initiatives face. Firstly, limited funding prevents projects from reaching everyone in need. Political issues, corruption, and bureaucracy slow progress and reduce effectiveness. So these challenges mean local development is often fragmented, benefiting only a small part of the population. And here where globalization makes a real difference. Because international cooperation, multilateral agreements, and global organizations provide the resources, training, and expertise needed. Local efforts become connected to a global network, turning small, limited projects into sustainable programs. This is where international organizations and NGOs step in. They fill the gaps, share knowledge, and also support real and lasting change. These global organizations play an important role in development. They share technology to improve local skills and productivity, open access to global markets, and create projects that respect local cultures. Through teamwork and cooperation, they help communities grow stronger, reduce inequality, and make development fair and sustainable for everyone. So in conclusion, globalization is not a distant economic process. It is a practical, multi-level tool that creates real and lasting impact. This is why our team's position is so clear. Globalization is the most effective way to achieve economic and social equity, especially for the marginalized communities. And thank you.
I would like to thank the previous speaker for that fine speech. Now allow me to invite the first speaker from the opposing side, Sarah Al-Madid.
Test, okay. The buzzwords that proposition use don't outframe what reality actually looks like. The price the Global South pays for economic participation is with their lives. Two parts to my argument. First, I'll start with a setup and then my argument on how global socioeconomic inequality is hugely exacerbated by MNCs, multinational corporations. But let's be very clear about what globalization looks like. Like, there are actors involved. The first are sovereign states, the second are multinational corporations, and this is a huge part that I'll discuss in my speech, and international non-governmental organizations like Proposition said. But they directly affect each other, especially in socioeconomic ways. But for instance, like MNCs grow to have global presence, they have supply chains that transcend the whole world, and they span dozens of companies. So I want you to think of like Nestle and Apple and stuff. So there's a particular focus that we'll have in this debate where there's such expansive globalization on the technology and industrialization that Proposition thinks is so necessary for global economic survival. My first argument then, or let's just note that comparatively we think that local and regional efforts are much better at being culturally sensitive and addressing local issues than international organizations. Like, it's unclear why you want to be culturally sensitive by not including the people that are already working on those problems on the local scale. So on to my first argument then, and this is a direct response to how they think that there's such a fundamental need for infrastructural development and that there's so much demand. I'll discuss now. So local economies in the global south are totally smothered by MNCs, right? After suffering merciless exploitation for centuries, the global south is now expected to put up with opportunity, which is actually just exploitation. So MNCs specifically exploit these countries that have unentrenched socioeconomic protections and lax labor laws. This is way too low for me. But this is a direct response to what Proposition says, because the problem is that there is a pre-existing dependency on MNCs, right? In the products that they offer, in this infrastructure that we need, in this technological growth that's happening, because of the same access and development that they think is necessary, causes all this exploitation that happens to the global south. And it was no accident. I mean, MNCs have branched out to every corner of the globe, specifically because of their big names. They can take out huge loans at lower interest rates than local companies. And so that dependency stifles out and stamps out local corporations and ability for local businesses to grow. But secondly is because MNCs have access to global supply chains, right? They can get the cheapest raw materials and the cheapest labor, so they can stamp out companies even further. But a huge impact is that skilled workers don't even stay in the global south countries to contribute to any socioeconomic progress, so it's unclear how any of their benefits materialize on their side. Instead, they search for opportunities abroad. Third thing under this, and third reasons why MNCs are so detrimental to local economies, is because they engage in dumping practices. They drop prices so low that local companies just can't afford them, so they've cleared the field of all the local businesses, and then they come in and they raise their prices again. So once again, there is no chance for local businesses to flourish. So last piece of analysis under this is that MNCs also politically involve themselves by lobbying governments into creating more barriers of entry for local companies. So this is a bunch of analysis that has told you how MNCs stifle out all the economic growth that happens, that they claim benefits somehow the economy of the global south, or of the world, the global economy as a whole. MNCs make money off of the global south's labor, while local economies can't flourish on the local market. They're beholden to global fluctuations, and all this analysis has a huge social consequence, because I just explained how dense the global south's dependency on MNCs is. So when MNCs want cheaper labor and cheaper raw materials, they get it, and it's the people who suffer the exploitation. The 300-some beloved smartphones in this room are a direct consequence of lobbying and political arm twisting by MNCs carrying out forced labor. Panel, globalization is only rebranded exploitation.
I would like to thank the previous speaker for that fine speech. Now, allow me to invite the second speaker from the affirmative side, Ahmed Al-Naimi.
Ladies and gentlemen, globalization is not an ideology, it's an economic architecture, a system of flows that converts connectivity into capability. Some may believe it widens inequality, that global elites tighten their grip on wealth. But history tells a different story. When countries integrate, inequality between nations shrinks, even if inequality within them adjusts temporarily. These are not structural failures, they are merely necessary transition costs on the road to destination gains. First, I'll argue the impact of globalization on economic equity, and second, the role of tech. Let's begin with free trade, the engine of globalization. Where they say dumping practices, we say trade liberalization lowers barriers, harnesses comparative advantage, and introduces economies of scale, reducing prices for those who need relief the most, low-income households. The MNC produced smartphones 20 years ago, a luxury. Today, through global supply chains, modular production, and tariff reduction, it costs the fraction of what it did previously. Connecting low-income households to finance, education, and healthcare, refrigerators, global supply chains, standardized production, slash prices, improving nutrition, and reduce waste. Good nutrition doesn't need to be culturally sensitive. That's not a theory, that's consumer surplus turned into tangible welfare. Founded upon globalization, when the European Economic Community was created, Western Europe entered a period of lasting peace and economic growth. Now it serves to reduce unemployment by removing barriers to work. People can move, trade, and build careers anywhere in the Union, easing local job shortages. In essence, globalization flattens the postcode lottery. It breaks the monopoly of proximity, where global markets favor insiders and global labor markets reward merit and mobility. Cross-border entrepreneurship, remote work, and export services expand opportunity beyond geography. Additionally, it provides global labor standards and practices to protect workers who are otherwise vulnerable. So when critics warn that globalization empowers elites, they overlook the mechanism, competition. Competition reduces monopoly rents, forces transparency, and keeps capital accountable, all while lowering costs for consumers, who are primarily the main stakeholders here. On technology, technology is globalization's most transformative vector. It is the diffusion of innovation that morphs knowledge into global inclusion. 4 mechanisms over there. First, access. Digital platforms have erased geography from education. A student in a small town can now access MIT lectures online and for free. At the same time, tele-tutoring platforms allow teachers in low-income countries to reach global students, multiplying their income while offering affordable learning worldwide. That is not charity, it's reciprocal equity, a win-win ecosystem. Second, on inclusion, mobile banking, e-wallets, fintech systems brought millions into formal economy, enabling saving credit for a class once excluded. Third, on productivity, technology under globalization compresses the cost of innovation. Open source tools, cloud computing, shared data, letting developing economies leapfrog industrial stages as witnessed in the Arab Gulf and the Asian tigers. Fourth, on social justice, technology empowers marginalized communities like those in Sudan or Palestine through using international platforms to voice underrepresented groups and facilitate grassroots movements and rally support for local issues. Thus, technology under globalization is not a zero-sum game. It is mutual gain. Access to global platforms raises living standards in the South, while global markets gain new creators, coders, and consumers. Let's compare the models. Protectionism raises prices, locks opportunity behind borders. Globalization, responsibly governed, lowers the costs, spreads technology, and opens labor markets. Isolation preserves privilege. Integration democratizes it. We stand for a world where connectivity is the new currency of justice. That is not regression. It is progress, measurable, visible, viable, and inclusive. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank the previous speaker for the fine speech. Now, allow me to invite the second speaker from the opposing side, Pragyan Acharya.
Hello. Okay. Give me 1 second. Ladies and gentlemen, I speak to you as someone from Nepal, a country that this September quite literally burned. What started as the TikTok trend, where the gilded lifestyle of politicians and businessmen's kids were being exposed, it spilled from the screens onto the streets. And the soundtrack for those TikTok videos was ABBA's "The Winner Takes It All," an anthem that went viral for young people who were forced to make ends meet while their counterparts were enjoying and living a life of luxury. And one question rang clear, which was, where did this money come from? In days, the protests turned to deadliest unrest seen in decades. Parliament and government offices were torched, curfews were imposed, scores were killed, and a lot of people were injured. And this example is not just a case of law and order. It is a diagnosis of distribution. When a generation sees that wealth is flaunted while schools and hospitals and jobs starve, it recognizes that this is a system where gains are privatized and it moves upward, and losses are socialized and they move downwards. And the viral chorus captured the hard truth. The winner takes it all, and the loser has to fall. In the world economy we have built, too many communities are cast out as losers, and this is why there is regression of socioeconomic equity by design. So ultimately, even if average incomes rise, even if you have many people can now have smartphones, the key question for this debate is who has benefited how much from this, and that is the real test of equity. For the lithium batteries that underpin the electric vehicle transition and the environment revolution, there is groundwaters drained from fragile communities with indigenous people relying on it in Chile. For the cobalt batteries that powers these very smartphones, there are mines with child labor in Congo. For the global fashion industry, you have catastrophes like the Rana Plaza incident in Bangladesh, where 1,000-odd people were killed because an 8-story cheap, shoddy factory broke down because they wanted to cut on price. And these are not isolated examples. This is exactly what Sarah was describing in her speech when she said that corporations and global elites, when they move into these new markets that globalization allows them to, they can create an arbitrage of cheap labor, flaunting regulation, and capital flight, which structurally shifts capital away from these communities outside of their borders while locking these producers into low-wage, low-bargaining positions. That is precisely why the strongest global economies are the ones who are trading, while the poorer ones are stuck with trading agricultural goods, trading raw materials without having the capacity to build their own industries and develop. 2 points in my speech that I want to highlight. First, access does not equal equity. And I think Sarah has said a lot about this. I just want to make 2 more points. The first is what they call access, as I mentioned through my examples, is actually a race to the bottom when they're competing on price. And second, equity is about distribution and it is about dignity. If the price of access is unsafe, underpaid, coarse labor, then the gains concentrate with the owners and socioeconomic equity regresses. The second point that I want to make here is that this race to the bottom is not just for people, it's also for countries. And that's why the first speaker from Proposition is correct. No one has an option. Everyone needs to open their market. They need to stay competitive. This is why within countries, they compete on providing the cheapest labor, the easiest regulation, the best environment for these companies to set up business. And this is what widens within country inequality. At the end of this debate, one thing that you should ask yourself when judging this debate and who decides this debate, you have to ask yourself if these following categories have regressed. Labor share, it has regressed. The wages have not grown in proportion to the amount of money you can get out of capital investment. Second, wealth concentration has only increased. That means, by definition, equity has regressed. And third, countries are not able to, use their tax for developing healthcare system and the economic system because all this capital is flying out of these nations by the help of global elites in the country and global elites outside of the country. And obviously workplace safety and dignity has only regressed. So yes, we've had absolute improvement, but it is not translated to relative fairness. Thanks.
I would like to thank the previous speaker for their fine speech. Now allow me to invite the third speaker from the affirmative side, Moza Al-Hajri.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying that our team acknowledges that there are many issues with globalization. However, what we think that the opposing team has failed to propose until now is what is the alternative? What is a tangible alternative that the world can move towards that fixes the problems you're talking about? All of the alternatives come through globalization and through fixing globalization. What they did not tell you is what is the world they would rather have that would have continued happening without the globalization that we have today. They want a world where geography, class, and privilege decided who could learn, work, or trade. They're defending the past world where advantage went to land, factories, and inherited capital rather than competition and openness. They're defending a world where even on the social aspects, influence was concentrated. Media, academia, policy making was centered around the West and around who had the physical capital on the ground. On the other hand, the world we are defending, as Farah and Ahmed have already told you, is a world that believes that we are interconnected, whether we want it or not. Things like the pandemic showed us that we are interconnected. Things like our summit today shows us that we are interconnected. So let's make the most out of that and fix the problems that we have with it, rather than ditching this whole idea and the miles that we went through as a humanity to get to this stage of globalization. And going back to a worse past model. Ahmed has already told you about how labor has enhanced globally because of the access that we have to education digitally, because of things such as remote jobs, where your skill as a human is valued more than your location. Like the structural barriers are simply less in our world. Things like social mobility, which I really want to emphasize on. Why do you think we know about all the problems that you're talking about, the problems in Bangladesh, the problems in Sudan? Because of globalization, because we have social media, and because the people in those marginalized communities have the means in our world today, through globalization and through technology, to tell us about their struggles, for them to have that kind of socioeconomic mobility. The reason we know about it is because we heard about it because of globalization. Their main points were basically that MNCs exploit, they create supply chains that favor them, and that they drop prices. And yes, we agree, those are problems. However, MNCs are problematic all over the world. In the US, they're problematic. In France, they're problematic. In India, they're problematic. In China, they're problematic. So that's a problem within the corporate system. That's not a problem of globalization particularly. Similarly, but we think regardless of that, they still create benefits that reach everyone. They create infrastructure that reaches everyone. Whether you use the road to ship something out of a factory or you use a road to go to school, you're using that infrastructure, you're using those airports, those ports, and that simply uplifts millions of peoples. Similarly, when we talk about countries that continue to have bad policies, we tell you again, this is not a problem of globalization. We know about this problem and we have better standards because of globalization, but these are simply bad political incentives that exist within those countries that we can fight through globalization, through global solidarities. Things such as South-South connections are possible because of globalization. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to leave you with this. We live in a world that has exponentially lifted people out of poverty compared to any other time in history, and that is simply because of how we progressed as a humanity in terms of our development through globalization and through multilateral cooperation. Yes, there are problems, so let's use the tools that we've worked towards to fix them. Thank you.
I would like to thank the previous speaker for that fine speech. Now allow me to invite the third speaker from the opposing side and the last speaker of the debate, Hamad Al-Mahdi.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Hamad Mahdi. I'm the third opposition side, and I'm going to be having a go at globalization today. So globalization is a complex topic, and the reality of this is, the reason for that is that it has made a real and tangible difference in the lives of all of us here in this room today. A lot of the luxuries we enjoy on a daily basis, from the iPhones in our pockets, to the electric cars that we drive, to even medical innovations that save lives every single day, are a product of globalization. But the issue at hand isn't whether globalization has caused benefits, because only a madman would even attempt to argue otherwise. The issue at hand is, has globalization advanced or regressed global equity? And to answer this question, we can't just look at one another in this room and say, has globalization benefited me, right? Because of course it has. Every single person in this room is in the top 30%, if not the top 10%, if not the top 1% of the world when it comes to affluence. In order to answer this question, what we must ask is that, At what cost do these benefits come? What is the cost for us to enjoy all of these luxuries? And the reality is, it comes at the cost of the bottom 50%. I'd like to pose a question for the people in this room. Does the child forced into lithium mines for your Tesla to run smoothly or for your iPhone battery to run smoothly benefit from this advanced socioeconomic equity? Or is he a victim of a system wherein what actually occurs is that multiple multinational corporations are looking for the cheapest resources in the highest quantity, no matter how they do it? I think that's the reality. In a situation where around 75% of lithium supply chains include forced and child labor. Does the Sudani child whose parents have just been murdered by foreign weaponry experiences in this advanced equity caused by globalization? Or is this situation a direct effect of globalization, wherein foreign interests, because of what they want that lays beneath his very feet, are using their advanced wealth, advanced experience to fund whoever, to do whatever, in order to get the minerals and whatever other resources that they want, no matter the consequences? This is globalization. Does the Palestinian child who watches American missiles from Israel crash down on his home, destroying everything he once knew and loved, experience this greater equity from globalization? Or is the reality that globalization has destroyed everything he once knew and loved? I think the answer to all of these questions is quite clear. Globalization at large means that there's greater interconnectivity within the world. Does this mean that all of us are going to bring one another up? Does this mean that we're all going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya right off into the sunset? Each of us gets mutual benefit? Or is it the case, like my first speaker said, like my second speaker said, the reality of what happens is a much bleaker and darker reality? The reality is that the more economically developed countries and companies use their additional wealth, use their additional advantages, use their supply chains, their economies of scale to completely suck dry and exploit the less economically developed countries and organizations. For example, she gave many different examples, and all these different countries that are crushing the competition that may be in those countries and completely conquering and trying to suck these different organizations dry. And we've heard many brilliant examples, from Nestle to all these other multinational corporations. To end, I would like to leave you all on one note. Globalization is here, and no one is arguing about that. The third speaker said that we didn't offer an alternative, and we don't need to. However, what we're doing today is we're trying to show you some of the shortcomings of globalization. And I think one of the most pertinent shortcomings of globalization is that it has not caused additional socioeconomic equity across the world. No. It has caused a larger gap. It has caused the richer to become richer and the poorer to be exploited by those same rich individuals for them to line their own pockets. So I'd like to leave you on one note. It is here to stay, and whether it is a net positive or net negative, it's for us to decide. However, what we must ask ourselves is should we continue down this path of rapid globalization, or should we take a step back and make some room for further nationalization? And I hope I made a compelling case.
A warm round of applause to our debaters for giving us plenty of food for thought. Before we move to our Q&A session, we'll first hear from two distinguished commentators who will help us unpack today's discussion and reflect on its wider implications. Holly Benner is a global education and youth development specialist who has worked with organizations like Qatar Foundation, Education Above All, and the UN Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, empowering youth people to lead change through dialogue and civic engagement. She is also currently the World Bank Group country manager for Qatar. Khatija Patel is an award-winning South African journalist and former editor-in-chief of The Mail and Guardian. She is currently the director and journalist in residence at the International Fund for Public Interest Media, advocating for equity and accountability in global news. Please join me in welcoming Holly Benner and Khadija Patel for our post-debate commentary. Holly, Khadija, thank you both for being here today. To kick things off, after observing the youth debate, what stood out to both of you the most, either in the arguments themselves or in the way in which this generation understands globalization and equity?
So Thank you so much, Amira. I have to start by first congratulating all of the debaters, both for your energy and your eloquence and for this very important exchange. I wanted to add a bit, if I could, to this debate by reflecting on the experience of youth and the next generation in the Middle East and North Africa region in MENA, which is the setting, of course, of this debate today. And also it's a really unique, I think, and consequential moment for the region. I wanted to actually reframe the question of today's debate from whether globalization has advanced or regressed socioeconomic equity to how we can harness globalization to promote jobs and opportunity for the MENA region's next generation, for all of you, the youth of the region. And I think I wanted to really emphasize, why is this important for MENA? So this region is the youngest in the world. In the next 25 years, 220 million more people will enter working age. This is a 40% increase. And this is the second largest labor force expansion globally after sub-Saharan Africa. But today, youth unemployment here in MENA is the highest in the world. Female labor force participation is only around 20% compared to the 50% average globally. So people are getting left behind in this region, despite globalization gains. And even where education levels are high for women, opportunity is not keeping pace. And the challenge is not talent and potential, as we saw today. The challenge is equitable access, inclusion, opportunity in the labor market. So how do we really harness globalization to create equitable opportunities for the MENA region's youth, the future of this region? At the World Bank Group, and you all spoke quite a bit about multilateral development institutions. So our mandate, I think this is important, is to end extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity on a livable planet. So the shared prosperity is a fundamental part of our dual mandate of the bank. And this really can only happen through creating equitable jobs and opportunities. Jobs provide dignity and purpose. They unlock potential, empower women, engage young people, create business opportunities and entrepreneurship, and the best social protection is a job. So I think for this region, delivering on the promise of globalization means bringing more youth into the labor force and unleashing the private sector to create jobs. Through globalization, we can, and we will, I hope, grow sectors that create local jobs from global opportunity in energy security. We talked a lot about digital development, information technology, agribusiness and climate services, and high-value manufacturing. So I think our role as the World Bank, as a multilateral development bank, is not to defend globalization or dismiss it, but really to harness it, acknowledge it's happening, and how do we really harness it for jobs and poverty reduction, especially in this very young and vibrant region of MENA. We need to help countries make globalization work for people, not just for markets. And we can draw inspiration from a lot of really exciting work that's happening across this region. For example, on digital jobs and youth entrepreneurship in Jordan and Morocco, Egypt's efforts to create climate-related jobs, and one of the fastest increases in the world in female labor force participation in Saudi Arabia. So I just wanted to conclude my reflections with a call to action. This region has enormous potential. Its population is young and dynamic. Its geography is a bridge between continents, and its people are innovative and entrepreneurial and have been extremely resilient to a lot of shocks, conflict, insecurity, and a lot of socioeconomic shocks over the past years. So I think it's a unique moment for the region to really utilize globalization to create jobs at scale, especially for youth and women, those populations that are getting left behind. And I think you, as the region's youth, have a central role to play in this effort. You have incredible resourcefulness, spirit, as we saw in the debate today, and high aspirations. You're using technology in new ways to connect and mobilize. And I really challenge all of us to find ways to enable all of you and to really harness globalization to promote meaningful jobs for this region's youth, especially its young women. Not because it sounds good, but very practically, as someone from the World Bank, because we can't afford to waste this region's great economic and social asset, its young people. So thank you. I wanted to make that reflection on the debate, and congratulations for really an eloquent set of arguments. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Holly. First of all, I don't have prepared remarks, but congratulations to the debaters. I am in awe of you, and congratulations to Qatar Debates as well. I mean, what a way to end the summit for all of us, to listen to actually young people reframing some of the most challenging issues of our time. So I come from a city called Johannesburg in South Africa, 4 flights a day from Doha. Anybody want to go? Hit me up. And so Johannesburg is the wealthiest city in Africa. 40% of all of the gold ever mined owes its heritage to Johannesburg. So 40% of any gold anywhere, most of the gold then in the world is likely to have been mined historically in South Africa. This is a city that was only established because of the discovery of gold. It's a relatively young city, established in about 1892, which is when my ancestors decided that moving to Africa is a good time. And the legacy of that is that 100 and whatever years on, we have these piles of dirt right around the city. I grew up thinking they were mountains. As a kid, I thought they were mountains. It's like yellowish mounds of sand all around the city. It's actually the debris from historical mines. They're now actually being remined. Those mountains of dirt are actually being remined, particularly by Chinese miners who have discovered that, of course, the extractive practices of the past actually had left behind quite a bit of value in there, and so they're remining that. So there's new value being found in these heaps of dirt. Meanwhile, what has happened to this city that was established around the discovery of gold? Like I said, it remains one of the largest in Africa. It is certainly the richest in Africa, but it is also the most unequal place in the world. You have vast riches, and you also have some of the most poorest people in the world. And that is a heritage of untrammeled capitalism. This is the heritage of corporates that are not held to account, that are able to enrich themselves without actually thinking about what comes next, what comes after them. So Anglo-American, the very large miner who basically owned most of mining operations in South Africa, a couple of months ago, they merged with a Canadian company. They're now Anglo-Tech, I think they're called. So a lot of jobs, even the residual jobs that were left by Anglo-American, are now moved away. And I take you back to those heaps of sand in Johannesburg that continue to be mined away. Value continues to be extracted from places like South Africa, from places like Johannesburg. And unless we find platforms to ensure dignity for everybody, unless we find ways to understand each other, we will continue replicating that. So in my current work, one of the strands that we're trying to unpick is how information inequity is actually essential to understanding this. All of the speakers spoke about technology, for example. They spoke about Bangladesh. They spoke about Nepal. The fact is that news media everywhere in the world is completely broken. In high-income countries, in low-income countries, in middle-income countries, our ability to know each other is now also being completely dependent on how wealthy we are in society. So the richest people in societies have access to the best information, while technology companies continue to extract from us. The entire business model of technology companies, especially generative AI, has been much like the mining companies, to extract while not ensuring equitable value to the societies from which they extract from. So as we leave the social summit here in Doha, I think there's an important question for us to ask ourselves in how we continue these discussions and how do we ensure that there is true equity. And certainly I think that the speakers that we've heard here today have the right spirit in ensuring that we continue to engage with some of the most challenging problems of our time. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to ask some follow-up questions. I'll go one by one. So I'll start with Holly. So in your role at the World Bank, you're constantly engaging with policymakers on questions of equity and growth. If there's one message from this youth debate you'd want them to hear, what would it be?
I think that the key piece is the equity piece, right? So in everything we do, I think the speakers said it quite eloquently, that globalization is happening, it's moving forward. And the key is how we, in every way that we approach development, how we keep this lens of fairness and equity and lifting up those that are lower income or marginalized. So I think I take from the debate that we have to question and push ourselves in every type of development intervention. And as we speak with policymakers, to keep the kind of voice and perspective of those that are being left behind at the forefront.
Khadija, several of the youth speakers mentioned how globalization shapes access, whether through technology, culture, or information. From your perspective as a journalist, how do you see media influencing these narratives? Who gets heard and whose experiences of globalization are left out?
So yeah, this is my life's work. The problem is that we have inequity, and the information inequity mirrors socioeconomic inequity. They are a product of each other. So yes, there is a huge gap between women's voices and the representation of women. For example, Holly spoke about young people and the representation of young people and the experience of young people in the media. We heard from the speaker from Nepal, and I think that one of the most fascinating movements this year has really been, the Gen Z movement generally, but in Nepal, because of thinking about how those young people actually related to media as a, as kind of like the heritage idea of media, but also how they are transforming it as well. The fact that TikTok was so transformative in mobilizing people and getting them onto the street, but then also how they used platforms like Twitch, and I think the leaders were Discord. I'm showing my age. And so, the fact that there's a continuous transformation of access and representation, and I think that for many decision makers, for financiers, for development professionals, it's absolutely essential for us to understand that the gap will grow wider unless we show huge courage right now. And for me, that is my central message. I think that I am alarmed when I speak to policymakers around the world who are all ready to accept that, yes, there's a huge challenge. We know it's a problem. Yes, absolutely terrible, terrible thing. Sorry, we don't have the money to help you right now, right? And this is a problem that, that we face continually. Like, I'm constantly surprised by how rarely I actually have to make the case for this, but how often I find a complete lack of courage, because it's not just, we're not just asking for dollars, we're asking for a commitment to something greater, a commitment really to ensuring equity wherever we are. And that does not always take dollars. That shows a readiness to admit humanity beyond borders. And in a world that is increasingly retreating insularly, where we're seeing Europe, the predominant narrative being about security, we're seeing the US, whatever's going on there, who knows. where is leadership going to come from? It has to come from places like this, from rooms like this, from my mind dumps in Johannesburg. This is where leadership has to come from, and this is where new forms of expressions of media, new forms of consumption of media have to be supported. Because information is a public good. We need information in the same way that we need food, in the same way that we need drink. In order for human beings to thrive, we need to understand the world around us. We've heard here that there is a $3 trillion gap in financing development. Much of that gap also includes a gap in financing media. And it is a glaring gap in low and middle income countries. So for me, I think that the problem is only set to get greater. All our complaints about representation, about narratives, they're only set to become worse unless we show courage in this moment now.
A huge thank you to Holly and Khadija for these thoughtful reflections. Now we'd love to hear from you. Please raise your hand for questions or comments as we open the floor for discussion.
Thank you so much, Moderator Chair, for recognizing. I would like to ask a question to the opposition team. You mentioned that multinational companies exploit laborers and how globalization is regressing social equity. But my question is, like, what other solutions or what other policies are you offering to combat those negatives in globalization? Because it's not a fact that people who are living in Turkmenistan or North Korea who doesn't follow globalization or have their own like self-reliant economy are living in a utopia. They have one of the worst records of human rights in the world. And so in that sense, also, I remember the second speaker talking about how corporations oftentimes takes the wealth away from the people. But how are you ensuring that the wealth is going to the people and not going to another power or another kingdom or another government? And the second question is towards the government side, which is you talk about how globalization helps to like lift up people or give people opportunities, but how does it prevent powerful nations to bully countries which are performing poorly economically? As you can see, like a lot of nations like the United States or the Western power who holds like majority wealth, oftentimes like economically bully other nations to get support in different policies. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your question. I am guessing now we're out of debate mode, so we're not forced to defend the side that we're assigned to, and we can speak in, I think, a little bit more general terms, which is, I think, obviously what the two speakers who spoke before me also did. And I think you're correct in your question that, and we hear this a lot, right, when some people complain about the labor conditions in Qatar or the Gulf, it's really bad. But oh, if the Nepali guys were back home, it would be worse. So and that's in fact true. In fact, if you're back home, it's probably worse, and that's part of the reason why you're abroad and you're working in these conditions or so on, whatever. I guess I would go back to what the country manager for World Bank also mentioned. I think the real question is how do we harness globalization, and how do we harness these international organizations to create laws and policies that prevent the worst excesses of cheap labor and exploitation and so on. So I think that's the solution. I think that's where the global direction is headed to. I think that was where most policy direction is as well. It was just for the purposes of the debate, in an illustrative purpose, we're trying to highlight how in the vast majority of instances, and this is also as a proven fact, that wages have not increased commensurate to how much people earn through a variety of these type of extractive projects. So that's what I would say, unless my colleagues have anything else to add.
I'd like to make an addition if possible. I think when it comes to globalization, it's quite clear we can't go back from where we are right now, right? Globalization is an inevitability. We can't go and put up walls and block all media from outside sources, etc. So it's as much as you like it or you don't like it, globalization is here and it's here to stay, right? The question that we were just attempting to answer today is that had it effectively produced a situation wherein the socioeconomic equality of the world, etc., for example, has been improved? Our argument simply is that it hasn't created that situation. It's not like the utopian situation, etc., where you think that there is this equality, there is a situation where everyone is being brought forth. If anything, it has worsened it to an extent. Even though there is some material prosperity that's going on, to an extent, this equity that we're looking for has been worsened, and this is something that is clear to say. With regards to alternatives, with regards to all of these other really deep philosophical and administrative issues, we are this is not our specialty. we can't really give you a direct answer, but we're just trying to critique the system in of itself rather than offering a big solve.
Great. Does anyone else have? Yes, at the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. As I've listened to the debate, I really enjoy it and what observers have given us. But I want us to think towards this direction. Globalization is majorly for countries between countries, but it has left a lot of inhabitants of the same country competing for just a small quota, where we will not have the value of equity and value of anything. So, is the World Bank working towards rural-urban drift? That is another type of globalization that could happen in a country to help the country in making a good shift in trade and barter crisis. So if we can do it, the globalization within countries, like domesticating the globalization of worlds to each other, of countries to each other, let there be globalization within the same country where they have domesticated the value of equity and it is spread before it is even traded to outside countries. What is the World Bank doing? What is the UN doing towards making governments of countries work on the mass drift from the rural areas to the urban areas where technology has enhanced the ability of competition? By listening to the news, the world news, you see who is exploiting who has sovereignty and who does not have sovereignty. So if there is a work that the global world is doing on rural and mass drift between the same country, inside the same country, I think that will help the globalization effect, and it will be easier to manage at the top when it has started from the food soldiers who are working in different areas of extraction of mineral resources or what have you.
Holly, since your specialty is the World Bank, would you like to take that?
That's an easy question, thank you. No, thank you, sir. I think this is a really important question, and I was thinking also, reflecting on the question you had asked me on how we can engage with policymakers in a better way to address these, and I thought, I'm forgetting which debater, but this point that was made on measuring absolute improvement but also relative fairness. And I think here is the key, is if we could shift the discussion on how we measure success and impact towards from the absolute to also the relative. And as I mentioned, our World Bank mandate has the shared prosperity aspect to it. And I think this is key, and this is what we're also trying to measure and think about in terms of impact within the World Bank group, is really looking also at that equity dimension of development. Now, I'm glad you asked me this question because it gives me the chance to also say that we, just in our annual meetings in October in Washington, D.C., where we bring all the countries together, we launched a new initiative called AgriConnect, which is doing exactly the type of work that you're describing, which is sort of reinvesting in rural development as really an engine of job creation and food security, and bringing both the public and private sectors to bear around that. So I think we do see that the agricultural space, the rural space, is a critical one, and I think especially on this equity question, and we're putting a lot more resources and expertise towards that. So thank you also for this question. I think I can't answer it all, but it's an important one. Thank you.
Amazing. Does anyone else have a question? Yes.
Hello, my name is Daniel. I am the reason I had a really fun time watching the debate And I've been involved in debate myself for about 15 years. I run a organization called Debate Korea, actually, in South Korea. And because I've been involved for about 15 years, I think the limit for debate and like academic debate, competitive debate, is the fact that the debate doesn't leave the room. As in, like, all the discourse that happens, amazing discourse and all amazing arguments that happens, stay in the room. But I think what QatarDebate is doing is doing many events like this, where it doesn't just leave the room, but like we bring people in, and then having these discussions afterwards and making sure discourse happens outside, I think is a very important process. I'm kind of curious as to how the debaters think about this, or how everybody involved thought about and thinks about this process, because I'm just also being an observer myself in this process, and somebody who's very involved in doing these things internationally in other places. I'm very curious about the methodology and the philosophy behind it. Thank you.
Moza, would you like to give your thoughts?
So what we have been doing at QatarDebate, since we are a non-profit organization under Qatar Foundation, we are not a governmental institute. We try to engage with experts as much as we can. For example, we host the youth edition of Doha Forum every year, where we connect people or youth from more than 100 countries over the world with policymakers. So this is what we can do at QatarDebate. We also draft policies after every major conference or summit, and we share them with policymakers to make sure that the youth voices are heard, and our ambassador can compliment on this. Moza?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I just wanted to add on your point on taking the framework of competitive debates into other aspects, and I think that's really important, not only from an institutional perspective, but also as individual debaters going on and exploring their real world. I think we do have a competitive advantage of having that background in competitive debates, where in whichever room you are, whether you're in finance, you're in consulting, you're in education, you're in government, you can understand both sides, and it's like a given that there are two sides to each situation, and then you think from that, rather than someone who has not been exposed to that experience. It'll be much harder for themselves to put themselves into someone else's shoes, and so their point of engagement and their point of view on whatever work they do is going to be much more limited than a person like that to some extent has been exposed to a lot of different policies, a lot of different takes, especially engaging with people from all around the world as well, in the many tournaments and conferences we have.
I'd like to also add just a little point. You commented on or you mentioned the idea about the philosophy behind it. And I think the underlying nature of debate is that it's oral in nature. It's basically oration, and it doesn't get written down on paper. What QatarDebate does is it takes that one step ahead and writes it down and publishes it. We had many policy paper initiatives after our conferences and during our conference, where we train debaters to move from just the oration behind it into writing it down and getting it out there, and also being members of the community behind writing these policy papers and participating in symposiums at international levels.
Great. So while I would love to open the floor for more questions, due to time constraints, we'll have to put it at a close. Thank you to our wonderful audience for sharing your time, attention, and insights, and to our passionate panelists for igniting this vital conversation. This discussion may be coming to a close, but the work ahead is far from over. What we've heard today isn't just dialogue, it is a call to action. Whether you are a policymaker, educator, entrepreneur, or student, each of us has a role to play in ensuring that progress and prosperity are shared by all generations. Thank you all for being part of this important conversation and for helping bring this forum to a close. Thank you again.